Hi, this is Paul. Christian deconstruction is a topic that is on and off my channel. My channel has sort of become a place where people kind of come in, meet where they kind of both are coming in and going out of the church, or thinking about going out, or thinking about coming in. Recently, Rationality Rules and his Jordan Peterson Christ Whisperer video pulled up the Pew study that showed the rise of the nones, Nones, and this is an important feature in our culture right now and something that has certainly captured the attention of many clergy who want to keep the sheep in the fold for lots of different reasons, some better, some worse. It's helpful to remember, which was sort of glided over in his video, that most of the people who give up on church or give up on the Christian God hardly become rational in the sort of ways people imagine. This is a point Jordan Peterson made repeatedly, that people leave the church and they sort of believe in all kinds of things: reincarnation, astrology, good vibes, all sorts of things. And that's very well documented. And some might become ardent rationalists, but not too many. That seems to be perhaps a temperamentally driven minority position in the population. This rationality is the application of a sea of reasoned intentionality to provide ever greater well-being, imagined to be the opposite of suffering. That's in some ways the church of reason that is promoted by its ardent evangelists. There's an implicit promise in that church that this rationality can, in theory, deliver. As I've pointed out in many of my videos, it's an eschatological promise. There's a fancy theological word. It's where this all is shooting for. It's to make a better world, and so the fever of the aughts, which was, well, if we can only have Christians get rid of Christianity and all this rationality, then, or all this Iron Age mythology, then somehow a new age can dawn and reason can reign, etc., etc. Someone, maybe I should just pull up the video. Someone in the comments pointed out the plenty of rifts within the Church of New Atheism. Here are a couple of YouTubers in the Atheist Republic, and Matt Dillahunty descends into their reigns and cusses them out. Now, of course, you can read Martin Luther and find some really creative ways of Christians fighting with their opponents, but this is sort of where this thing goes. The Church of Rationality has a split in it, not totally unlike the split that Christians have. They can't agree on politics, and they can't agree on this, and they can't agree on that. And it's sort of what happens when you're a small group and you dream of gaining power, and then when you gain power, the whole coalition that brought you there sort of falls apart, and you discover the ways that your coalition was reactive instead of actually cohesive. But rationality, of course, is supposed to provide this, both the individual and corporate human capacity that we have to sort of cooperate and know the good and pursue the good together. And rationalists should be the most moral people, or the most happy people, the opposite of suffering, the most virtuous people who can collectively deliver the society and government to provide eternal conscious bliss, the hoped for ECB, as opposed to eternal conscious torment. Someday, of course. And, I don't want to poke too hard at this, but it is kind of a copy of a whole bunch of Christian promises and their ranks, including Matt Dillahunty, of course, who's made his own biography a big part of his selling point as a celebrity atheist, that he was a Southern Baptist and he believed in all these things and he had all the feels that Christianity provided, and now he has the feels without the mythology and has it rationally but not necessarily the unity or commonality. At least it's better than the failed project of Christianity. You can't expect the atheist to get this right. Well, why not? Doesn't their implicit credo account for the opposition beyond politics? Isn't this irrationality? And aren't each of us capable of rationality? But then you'll find it slips into sort of elitism. And and I don't poke at this just to be a jerk about it, because we see all the same weaknesses in the church. The church can't keep its act together. I'm a Protestant, I've separated myself from the Church of Rome, or at least my ecclesiastical ancestors separated themselves from the Church of Rome, and they're separated from the churches in the East and those hierarchies that are speaking Greek rather than Latin, and back and on we go. And so, of course, rationality, we try to have better solutions. And so this little thumbnail that I plucked out of a piece of the Good Place, and we're going to total up all of the bad things and the good things and give them a score and rate people on them, and in an afterlife sort of make up for, or nobody could get this right, so let's just continue to make up mythologies and stories to try to monkey with humanity while we jigger the imagination of the future. Most deconstruct not to rationality, but sort of a vague spiritual but not religious. The spiritual ideas seems to continue to have some degree of social cachet. The implicit belief in historical moral improvement that, the Bible stuff, that's just sort of archaic and passé, and today, because we have science and sociology and psychology and technology, we certainly know better and can do better. And there's skepticism. We have skepticism today. We're not like those ardent true believers that no religion got it right. Again, sort of like in The Good Place, where just this one dude got it right. Everybody had it a little bit right and a lot wrong, or more wrong and less right, and on and on. And of course, the payoff is in the afterlife. And so this time of year, we all settle down for a winter solstice festival. I just finished listening to Tom Holland's podcast. And Tom Holland and another historian have a podcast, and they're just fun guys to listen to, and talking about the origins of Christmas. And now suddenly my biblical Christmas has sort of been revealed to have come from Charles Dickens, and the back and forth on Christmas between Protestants and Catholics in the Reformation period and in the Puritan period, and the fact that they didn't pay much attention to Christmas in the first couple of centuries, and Charlemagne was crowned on Christmas, and well, I don't find a lot of atheists really pulling anywhere near the hard line on Christmas that Puritans. And my father used to call Santa Claus the big fat phony in the red suit. He didn't have much truck with Santa Claus, and so we didn't really grow up believing him. And in my little rationalist brain, I knew that the chimney went down to the gas furnace in the floor below. But language is so inconvenient. We have holidays, which are, of course, holy days, and we have Christmas, which is, of course, Christ connected with Mass. It's the Mass of Christ that happens. Growing up in New Jersey, plenty of Italian Catholics around me tuning in to the Vatican for the Christmas midnight Mass. And of course, only later did I realize that there's a time difference. When were they doing that in the Vatican? And what was the Vatican? And all of those things. And so we have festival pluralism. Of course, growing up in New Jersey, many Jews around who were celebrating Hanukkah, and that was sort of fuzzy with us. Where was Hanukkah in the Bible? It isn't. And what is it about? It's the Festival of Lights, but the lamps stay lit. And of course, in your childhood imagination, you just kind of appropriate little bits and pieces of that. They have the dreidel, and they get presents too. And of course, I should probably look up Comedy Central's. I forget. Why can't Stewart? Well, his riff on Christmas versus Hanukkah one year, really funny. Keep the explanations evolutionary and biological. Well, this winter solstice, it's the darkest time of the year for at least those of us in the northern hemisphere, and so we need the festival to kind of buck up our spirits. But then, of course, that doesn't really hold into January and February. We should have kept the original 12 days of Christmas and started at Christmas and at least had 12 more days of festival and pushed that push back that gift-giving day all the way to Day of the Kings, like in Latin America, and on and round we go. But at least make it about the kids, okay? And it's good for the economy too. I think many deconstruct out of Christianity over a failure to deliver. The church didn't seem to be living up to their dreams. The church's promises are so grand. Why isn't every sermon a home run? The preacher asks himself. Why doesn't every church service just lift us up into emotional, musical, rhythmic rapture, like you sort of see in I think it was the second Matrix movie? What were those promises exactly, and who made them, and what expectations did we bring into that little neighborhood church with the good people of the church just doing the best they can with respect to their music? Makes the disappointment more bitter, really, it does. But most who leave the church and deconstruct lament because, is it just nostalgia? They remember the unity of the town that they grew up in, and the religious faith of the family together, and how they really believed in a God who could save, and a God who could intervene, and a God who listened to their prayers, and whatever permutations of various religious traditions, at least as a child, there it was. But now as an adult, it's no longer credible. I think now, 10 years or so into new atheism, people have realized a comparative failure to deliver. Secular alternatives seem more reliable to deliver. We have the feels that we're looking for, the equality we imagined is right, the sciencey validation we are comforted by. It's amazing how science gets political when we have a pandemic. Our decisions are made on science. Is that how political decisions are made? In a democracy, I thought they were sort of the consent of the governed, because you can vote them out. Do we really make our political decisions on science? Because science can, in theory, deliver democratically, right? That's sort of the hope of science. It's the hope of basing of recalibrating our knowing faculties on materiality that seems the same all over the planet, that we can have laws of nature that reliably deliver the predictions that we want for when the sun will rise and when the sun will set, and what carbon and oxygen and hydrogen atoms will reliably do in chemistry, and the technology and the electronics, and the church didn't seem to produce like maybe a good antibiotic or a vaccine. We can selectively appropriate or salvage what we need from the failed and archaic if it serves us. And so, we'll keep some of those holiday songs around. And yeah, they're Christmas songs, and because they have the feels, and Dickens seems to be channeled into our world. But is it really all living up, or do we really miss the joy of Christmas we once knew? Sisyphus 55 just did such a smart take on Against Santa Denialism, where he just in rapid succession runs through so many of the Christian atheist arguments back and forth, and basically at the end lands us in a place where, of course we can't really believe these things, but to give up on the feels and to stop telling the stories just means that you're not going to participate in the best things that it means to be a human being, and sort of keep your two worlds apart, your science over here and your feels over here. And I think in some ways that's really where we've sort of landed as a culture in public right now. I found Sevilla's introduction to, I guess Adam didn't appreciate it too much, but her part 2 of her analysis of Peugeot and Adam Friended's conversation, her introduction into Persing's Metaphysics of Value, it was quite compelling. It was very well done. She did it in short order, and as someone who quite famously rambles on and on and on to put you to sleep at night, she did a great job. this value or quality is sort of a thing that is elusive to us, and we're sort of always chasing it. And so we deconstruct and we leave the church in order to find a better thing. It's always, I got this from Tim Keller too. It's not a matter of really leaving belief, but it's much more a matter of exchanging some beliefs for others. And we certainly feel ourselves making the upgrade. And so we find something that the frame is larger and it seems to encompass more, and it makes better sense out of bigger portions of the world. And we don't necessarily have to leave behind the feels and the unity and all of the things that religion gives us. And we don't have to somehow deny or keep out the science and the vaccines and all of those things that we want. The metaphysics of quality sort of has a tautology when it comes to our experience of it. Better is better. But we're always worrying about better, because if you're at least to one degree or another self-aware, you notice that, well, what I felt was better today isn't necessarily what I feel to be better tomorrow. And tomorrow I might have regrets about what I chose to be better the day before, and back and forth we go. And we're not quite sure of our rationalist credentials to make better choices. Maybe we're not as rational as we thought we were. Maybe in fact, this rationality we have is somehow not as good as just being lucky. This brings me, of course, back to this book that I keep coming back to on my channel. And I keep coming back to it on my channel because I keep coming back to it as me, not on my channel. Something about this book keeps bringing it back, keeps bringing me back to it, and thinking, oh yeah, he wrote about this there. Maybe it's sort of the lot of each of us to have a book or two that we can't put down and we keep coming back to. Maybe it acts sort of like a frame, because we keep finding how things fit together with it. It's rationality, of course, but this time of year, it's a good time to reread C.S. Lewis's The Grand Miracle. One of the things that I've picked up about Lewis is that a lot of his things got recycled. And so the Grand Miracle in the book is a little bit different from the Grand Miracle that you'll find on the C.S. Lewis Doodles page or in some of these other books that were sort of essays. Lewis was a very interesting man and intricate man, and so he recycled a lot of these ideas, and as I do too. You can't listen to my videos and not hear plenty of repetition. But in the Grand Miracle, he really gets into the Incarnation. We cannot conceive how the divine spirit dwelled within the created and human spirit of Jesus, but neither can we conceive how his human spirit, or that of any man, dwells within his natural organism. There's a friend of mine that I knew long before this. We were both expats in the Dominican Republic. He wasn't a missionary at all. He and his wife were atheists, and his wife, on Facebook at least, was quite a promoter of the new atheists. And before I ever got into the YouTube thing, I was debating atheism and theism on Facebook with some of these friends. And my friend, of course, was an atheist, but had suffering in life, and so decided to pursue Zen Buddhism. And even though he's lived in various places of the world, eventually he settled in Florida, where he can have a fish farm and where he raises ornamental fish. That's the business that he built for himself when he moved back to the United States. And but he would fly to Northern California because there's a Buddhist master that he would come and do retreats with once a year or so. And so, because an easy jumping off place to gather is Sacramento, and much though how wonderful for our friendship, throughout the year he consults with his Zen master and does his koans and those kinds of things. And every now and then he'll come here and fly here, and of course spend a night with me and the family on his way in, and often a night on the way out. And so we get to share things. And one year I'm driving him back to the airport, and he's talking about Christianity and asking a couple of questions and just kind of intellectual curiosity. But at one point he asks me, Do you really believe Jesus was God? And of course, yeah. But, now after doing a few years of videos, I probably would have asked him, when you say the word God, what do you think of? What kind of pictures come to mind? What kind of rational, logical assumptions sort of bubble up? How do we in our little picture thinking brains with our exaptation, when we're trying to use all this evolutionary machinery by which we can capture things with our very powerful eyes for two-legged walking Homo erectus peoples, what do we think of when we think of that word God? And could God be a man? Well, if you read C.S. Lewis's book, his rationality sort of shines through, and Lewis would sort of be in that classical group of people for whom the image of God is really sort of tied to this rationality and our capacity to be reasonable, our capacity to ask critical questions. I was listening to Tom Holland's podcast on Christmas and hearing him as a historian talk about the story, and having listened to and read now Tom Holland for quite a while, just listening to his wheels turn as he, as a historian, asks about, well, we've got the story of the wise men and Herod, and that's Herod the Great, and the killing of the boy babies of Bethlehem. But then we've got Quirinius as governor of Syria, and when, of course, Tom Holland mentions those things, all of my readings and commentaries of modernists versus fundamentalists, and can we piece this story together coherently as modernist historians kind of flow into it. So all of this rationality that we bring to the book and try and piece it together and ask ourselves how real Jesus was and how real the story is and how historical the story is. And Lewis sort of cuts the legs all out under all of that and says, this rationality business, this seems to come from above. We cannot conceive of how the divine spirit, capital D, capital S, dwelled within the created human spirit of Jesus of Nazareth, but neither can we conceive of how his human spirit, or that of any man, dwells within his natural organism, natural physis, this thing that sort of creates. And so maybe if Sevilla is riffing on Persig forever on her channel, I'm riffing on Lewis and his book Miracles. Because Lewis would say, well, to understand Jesus as divinity, that problem isn't wholly separate from us as rational, reasonable creatures ourselves. The first few chapters of the book, which is what we've really only managed to penetrate so far, and I'm absolutely delighted that JP, I always think of him as JP, Jean-Philippe, is that it? It's you Frenchies. I don't know French. Got to learn French. As JP has kept this in front of us and worked his panpsychism and all of his philosophical and ponderings into this little corner of the internet with his and grasping generously to help translate some of John Vervaeke's fancy Vervaeke words into this common tongue as we're all rationally seeking truth together. And of course, John Vervaeke and Awakening from the Meaning Crisis does some things to rationality that would make some of these celebrity atheists cringe and shudder. Rationality isn't necessarily what you think it is from a cognitive science perspective. Oh my. But Lewis's point in the book is really sort of an argument from reason, that one of the evidences for the existence of, in order to have a circumlocution around the circle thing, for the existence of our sourcing in the divine is reason. That we have this capacity, because from an evolutionary standpoint, reason doesn't necessarily give you a basis for truth. And it's very interesting to watch many of the celebrity atheists sort of embrace Don Hoffman and that idea, because, of course, a couple generations before, the justification for reason was survival, and now reason is divorced from survival in some of their thinking. And of course, Lewis has right from the start, and again, we only penetrated the first few chapters in this, reason colonizes nature, and this is basically emanation from above. It employs nature, it improves her. She willingly submits as she has made for this, as she has done for this invasion. And so now we're awaiting this new RNA vaccine, which will be put into our arms. We take the stuff of nature, and by employing reason, we now will fight a pandemic, and we'll try to improve the economy. And this is in many ways sort of the hope of all the rationalists, that this function of reason can overcome the plagues of nature, and by rational argument with each other, all upfront and direct, will overcome the divisions of humanity, and will all be reason. And because, well, again, you simply have to assume something. So the presupposition is that we all know the good. So once we all know the good, and once reason employs and nature gives way, and off we go together. C.S. Lewis says, well, all of that is sort of evidence of something quite apart from nature, isn't it? Because nature doesn't seem to care about this. This is what we bring to it. How can this be? Where did this come from? Mary Cohen is such a dear, and I noticed just when I was putting this together that she released a new video today. She, in her conversation, which I found delightful with Mark and Manuel, talked about a little bit about, I'm going to have to dig up the other video and rewatch that one too, talked about the ways that lesser things and greater things sort of come together. And of course, Lewis puts this in more the colonizing language, that greater things employ lesser things. And there's sort of a reciprocal return in this process, that lesser things are sort of exalted by greater things. And we see this in the meaningful participation within larger movements, that if you're using Jordan Peterson's little internal gyroscope of meaning, we love to be part of a greater movement. And that's why we love to have our political candidates win, or to be part of a great corporation who is doing wonderful things. And this, of course, contributes to the despair of some of those junior people at Jordan Peterson's publishing house that are, no, this isn't the kind of book we want to publish together. And some of the senior executives might ask, who's we? And the stockholders would have their thing to say about it. And so we as human beings sort of Voltron up into these principalities and these collective beings, and establish sort of a culture which becomes a way of having a collective consciousness and a collective identity. And we do all these things. And so you have the greater things and the lesser things, and you have this participation in sort of this magical movement together, which, of course, someone looking at church says, well, that seems to come right from the Apostle Paul. Yeah, it does. This is a pattern we regularly find in nature, that, it's the particular chemistry that makes the elephant's tusks ivory special, and it's the particular cellular biology that allows the bumblebee to beat its wings faster than it should, and it's all this particularity of tiny things and participating in larger things to create the wonder of the world we see around us. Lewis gets at this in his chapter on the grand miracle. What we can understand if the Christian doctrine is true is that our composite existence is not the sheer anomaly it might seem to be, but a faint image of the divine incarnation itself. The same theme in a very minor key. we can understand that if God so descends into a human spirit, and a human spirit so descends into nature, capital N, and our thoughts into senses and passions, and if adult minds, but only the best of them, can descend into sympathy with children, and men into sympathy with beasts, then everything hangs together, and the total reality, both natural, capital N, and supernatural, capital S, in which we are living is more multifarious and subtly harmonious than we had suspected. In other words, what Lewis is arguing is that the incarnation is not just sort of an anomaly, but in some ways for humanity inevitable. It seems to be the reason for which nature was created. By the very way that the patterns lay themselves out. That's Lewis's argument. And I think back on my conversation with John and JP on this, and well, what are miracles? And are miracles of a kind or of another kind? And this is why I argue that Lewis, I think, is making the argument that they are of a kind. So then how do we use this word miracles? Is miracle just a synonym for exceptional? Because Lewis basically says that in the incarnation we suspect its historicity because of the way that it fits in all of the patterns, in sort of a way to invert Hume's argument about probability and miracles, that if you understand the way nature works of lesser things and greater things and participation and how they all come together, and what a strange and welcome partner reason is to our capacity and intentionality, and to be able to take this manifest rich bounty that nature seems to offer us and employ it in seemingly miraculous ways, such as cell phones and the internet and all of the things around us, that the incarnation seems to be the climax of it all. That somehow that rationality itself could inhabit us and come and become one of us, and by that movement, move us and each of us towards our goal. That we recognize that the rationality of the celebrity atheists, in the exclusion of the joy, and it's when Jordan Peterson sort of pointed out to Sam Harris, the thing is, all of the art and music, you're not going to divorce it from the story. It's all of a piece. It's all of a whole. In fact, I don't think anyone would want to debate Jesus, but debating Jesus doesn't seem to be an argument in rational logistics. We catch sight of a new key principle, the power of the higher, just insofar as it is truly higher, and he capitalizes both of those, which is interesting, to come down, the power of the greater to include the less. Thus, solid bodies exemplify many truths of plane geometry, but plane figures know truths of solid geometry. Many inorganic propositions are true of organisms, but no organic propositions are true of minerals. Montaigne becomes kittenish with his kitten, but she never talked philosophy to him. I love that line. Montaigne becomes kittenish with his kitten, but she never talked philosophy to him. Everywhere the great enters the little. Its power to do so is almost the test of its greatness. So God would become one of us. He would become human without, in fact, losing his divinity. I can understand my friend's question. In fact, I was having a DM conversation on Twitter this morning and with someone, and talking about just how fresh fresh all of this is so often, and refreshed by the questioning, the honest questioning, sometimes the challenging, the honest challenging in good faith of those outside it. And perhaps in the course of these 3 years now, what has perhaps been the greatest gift that many of you have given me, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, whether you buy into this stuff, whether you're in that group sort of leaving the church or in that group sort of coming back into the church. When you ask me an honest question, that is challenging and hard, and if I have the grace of the moment to not be defensive and to not get too fearful or too anxious, and to stop and ponder the weight and the truth of the question, it drives me into deeper waters. It forces me to be more rational. It forces me to examine the lesser things, to see if they are of a kind with the greater things, to see if the patterns all do finally match. In the Christian story, God descends to reascend. He comes down from the heights of absolute being into time and space, down into humanity, down further still, if embryologists are right, to recapitulate in the womb ancient and pre-human phases of life, down to the very roots and seedbed of the nature he has created. But he goes down to come up again and bring the whole ruined world with him. One of the things that skeptics and deconstruction Christians will say to me sometime is, okay, well, if I can buy the whole miracle thing, if I can buy that this stuff really happened, or at least if parts of it really happened, because of course one break in the laws of nature destroy the fragile house of some rationalities. Well, so what if God became man and left? So what if Jesus walked out of the tomb 2,000 years ago? Weird things happen in the world. How does that connect up with me? Well, the image Lewis gives us is, in fact, one coherent world. And so much of what I'm seeing in pondering the conversations between Jonathan Peugeot and some of those who are struggling to understand him is a big piece of the deconstruction. A big piece of the rending that has happened is our desire to once again fit the whole world together in one system. And materialism sort of does that. That's the beauty of the system. If I can understand why I struggle to lose weight or stay faithful to one spouse or manage to take good care of my children or hold down one job for long enough or resist the triggers to yell at my boss even though it's going to get me fired. If I have an evolutionary story that sort of makes sense of it, that somehow affords me something in life that I didn't have without that evolutionary story. Well, that's a rather bizarre thing for us, isn't it? If we somehow have a story in which the pieces fit, we feel better about it, and our feeling better about it makes us a little bit less anxious, and we're not so quick to betray the boss or the job or the family or the nation or the marriage or the relationship, that somehow we derive strength from the story to go on another day and do the hard thing and do the meaningful thing, because somehow by virtue of the story we're participating in a larger thing. And this seems to be absolutely rational. It seems to be absolutely of a piece with what we find from all other human beings, but that's not how the animals work. And they tell us that the big difference between us and the chimpanzees is we can actually say no to ourselves productively, rationally, along a straight line. The idea that rationality itself would be incarnated And then the further, more disturbing idea that when rationality itself became incarnated, we decided to kill him. That seemed to be the rational approach. The rational approach to what end? To, as the postmodernist whispered, to maintaining all of our petty little self-serving agendas. The shallow aches for the deep and enduring. The generic attempts to be the wider door to the specific. The generic is everyone. We're ardent Democrats in that, small d, in that, it's not a fair system unless everyone has equal access. But then we're also ardent individualists because the specific has power, because the specific is about me. The particularly rational is a sample of the great rationality that penetrates and colonizes. Rationality doesn't work if it's not everywhere. Rationality doesn't work if it's not pervasive in the system. Rationality doesn't work if the systems are different everywhere and the laws of nature, which can be rationally deduced, aren't in fact pervasive all over the place, even if we've only got this little sample to measure and judge it by. It is the greater power that we fear, because we know that we are powerless if it wishes to destroy. And so often, the best the little church of rationalism can do is say, take your medicine straight. Well, that affords a little bit of meaning, a little bit of heroism, a little bit of pride, but you're dead nevertheless. And so what we do with this great source of rationality, this great source of being, is we rob it of personhood, because the last thing we wanted is to develop ideas and a will of its own. And again, C.S. Lewis trod this way before me in the book and in many of his other books. So we make it impersonal. And so we dress ourselves in great blue creatures that fly around on winged dragons and talk to trees through our long ponytails. But we make it impersonal until that moment when the other impersonal beings that have seemed to colonize rationality and colonize materiality and have come to our planet to mine the unobtainium, then suddenly are pleased to the impersonal act like an agent. It can't see us or hear us or know us. This is our anxiety speaking, because if it sees us, it might demand something of us, and there might be consequences to it. And we might have to face the fact that we are at its mercy. All those little speeches about bucking up and keeping a stiff upper lip and taking your medicine straight. Well, what about for personality in the universe? If God is a person and knows you by name and has ideas about your behavior, well, have that stiff upper lip and take that medicine straight too, why don't you? Recently, I heard someone basically saying God is an a-hole, and I thought, yeah, if you think that thought through, well, you don't really want to think that thought through. You really don't want to think that thought through. It doesn't go anywhere good. And to me, it just conjures up all sorts of memories of Jordan Peterson thinking that thought through and saying, if that's deep in your soul and that's how you're facing the world, you're not going to have a very good life. Now, Christians might say, well, you're in danger of damnation. And Jordan Peterson would say, that damnation starts today. But we can't not hope that it hears us when we are small and feeling our weakness and smallness. Isn't this the big knock, the big sort of implicit pre-postmodern Freudian sneer that, well, these ideas only emerge from us because we are small? It's no more stiff upper lips for that moment, I suppose. So we electively impersonalize so as to make it colonized by us. Ewa has heard us, and she will fight the terrible earthlings and leave our beautiful planet to us tall blue people. The droplet imagines it can rule the ocean. When I was thinking this through this morning, making this video, I thought about a movie, and I didn't remember the title, and I remembered it was Jeff Bridges, and so, again, do a little bit of internet stuff. The Vanishing, 1993. There's a scene in that movie. The movie, of course, is about an abduction, a very sad one, and Jeff Bridges is the monster doing the abducting, and he comes to a recognition that if he's actually going to lure the women into his clutches, he needs to look weaker rather than stronger. Because something too strong, well, we are weak, small, fragile creatures, and we spook easily. We spend centuries trying to employ the maker, looking for ways to bribe, the ways to wrap him around our little finger. We call it idolatry. But we are timid, wild creatures, and we have trust issues. If you want to read about them, open that most published book in the world and read Genesis 3. Who told you you were naked? We become weaker. He becomes weaker so that we might draw near, so that we might peer into that manger and look at that baby in swaddling clothes, that baby that has to nurse, that baby that one of the strongest arguments against abortion is, oh, does the child live without its mother after it's born? It's just as incapable after it's born than before. A good materialist would see the womb in that passage as just another strip of flesh. He became vulnerable so that we might hope to trust. In my Advent series, been talking about aliens, fear of things from above or hope of things from above. We represent it in Neo and how many different superheroes. He didn't rend the heavens, which is what they were asking for. It was an invasion of sorts, an invasion of rationality in a very strange place, in a young woman's womb. God announces his intention to marry. Zechariah sort of stumbled when it was his time at the plate in the temple and didn't get the talk until he acknowledged his name is John. But Mary takes it like a woman. God would instead rend a virgin's birth canal. The mother and the child would come into this world in pain like the rest of us. One of the patterns that you see in the Bible is that God's chosen people are chosen to suffer, and that seems to hold. God's chosen people aren't usually put on top of the heap. They undermine the karmic assumptions that we can make snap judgments in history about God's favor. He tells us straight out he uses the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And when the weak things participate, they find meaning and purpose and joy. They sing in a choir, letting the stronger singers mask their missung tunes. Mary, of course, comes and says, I am the Lord's servant. I don't understand any of this. May your word be fulfilled to me. And then the angel leaves right when you would imagine angels would be needed most. So have yourself a rational little Christmas. May your mood be bright. Deck the halls, work the culture, gather with your family, whether Christmas is, again, listening to Tom Holland's podcast, whether Christmas is a public holiday or a little close personal family holiday, whether it is informed by Dickens or your church. I hope you have a rational Christmas where rationality himself takes on flesh and demonstrates just how irrational we can really be.